This barn is a complete disaster. We're getting ready for winter here on the Return Homestead. It's coming up quick on us. We're seeing some of the signs already out here in the environment that tell us it's going to be an early winter. And we want to make sure we're ready and prepared. One of the places that we got really hemmed in last year, we moved in October. And when we moved, we had to take possession of this barn and begin using it immediately, including putting the chickens out here, before we had any opportunity to do any repairs or corrections on the barn. It also had plenty of material left inside of it from the previous owners, and we had to simply shove all of our stuff in on top of it. And it's been a disaster ever since. The high priority this year has been the garden, and we've done a really good job of staying on top of that and making sure we get plenty of food in. But now it's time to get ready for the winter. So today we're taking a look at what we have to do inside of this barn. We've learned quite a bit from Tony about how this barn was constructed. Turns out all of these materials are recycled from another barn. So that barn was disassembled and all the materials were brought here and reassembled into this structure. And there's a lot of evidence of that when you look around the barn. It's not a perfectly aligned building, but it is a very sound building that does accomplish most of its tasks fairly well. In previous videos, we've looked at some of the problems, like just here on the front doors, the way the doors are actually attached. The fact that there's no real post to hold the door. It's just sort of attached to the outside of the barn. And so far, we've only gotten this one door open. It is a pass-through barn, meaning there is a central aisle to the barn with stalls on either side. And it's intended that a tractor or piece of farm equipment could travel straight down the center of the barn and out the back door. That's really where we need to go with this barn currently. Everything is piled right here in the middle. We haven't done anything about utilizing the bays to either side of the central lane. So today it's all about trying to get into those bays, get all of our tools and resources packed away into those bays and opening up this central aisle. So far, I haven't even attempted to open this door, so I'm going to have a look at this thing and see if it's even feasible. So this front lip is pretty well buried. So I do want to be careful not to dig a trench or a hole here in front of the door. I just want to remove enough gravel to be able to make an attempt at swinging the door open. I'm not really liking the look of that bottom hinge, so I've got very little confidence that that's going to hold. So I don't want to move it too far. If I were to break it off, then I'm in a position of having to repair the door before winter, which I'd prefer not to do. If we can hold that off till next spring, that would be ideal. Eventually, both of these doors do need to be rebuilt. That's looking pretty stable. I'm going to remove a little bit more of this gravel and dirt here out front. See if we can open this up wide enough that we can get some good airflow through here and maybe be able to get some of this equipment out a little bit easier. With the doors fully opened, it's much easier to appreciate the intended pass-through nature of this barn. You can begin to see some of the structural decisions that were made that were actually right on the money. This barn was definitely built for a working homestead. Come have a look. So the large swinging doors that open up on either side of the main opening lead into an alleyway. And that alleyway is framed on either side by some bays or pens. So these were intended to be animal pens. You can see the dividing fence line back there where this would have been a pen that sheep or goats or any other small animals could have been kept in. We do have a ladder that was constructed to bring us up to what should have been a hay loft. So this loft is where hay would have been stored in the wintertime so that the animals could be fed inside of the barn. Now we're going to be using some different methods here on the Return Homestead. Our intent is to use rotational grazing and to leave the animals out on pasture as much as possible. We would only use the barn in extreme circumstances. And over here we do have another loft. Not sure if this was intended for hay or some other purpose. It does not have a ladder indicating that it wouldn't be accessed as often. So probably intended to be primarily just storage or a place to throw all that stuff you don't want down here on the floor. And right below that is another pen. So this particular pen has an opening to the outside. And that's where that metal is that you see on the front side of the building. And that metal could be removed and there would be a simple access door that would allow animals into this pen. The gate has long since been removed. And any fencing or paneling that was used to contain the animals on the front side has also been removed. All of which could easily be restored. And then there's a nice wide central lane that is also arched or framed in here by this structure. These are two extremely large railroad ties or railroad wood structures, probably from an old railroad trestle or bridge. And these do appear to be cross ties that were used on that bridge, and then a piece of the rail is spanning the top of this. And this provides an excellent anchor point for a gambrel. If you're harvesting animals, this is a great place to hang them from while you work. This could also be used as an anchor point for lifting engines out of machinery or even possibly lifting the corner of a piece of machinery up to remove a tire. So this is definitely one of those structures that indicates to me that this was intended to be a working barn. Over here on the left-hand side, we've got this long board that stretches most of the length of the barn, and it has these interesting little tie marks associated with it. So these little bits of what feels like some sort of a leather cording, very strong, very sturdy, probably intended for hanging crops. And since this is Kentucky, my assumption would be tobacco. So this was actually a working structure at some point, at least in its original construction, keeping in mind that this is the second time this has been assembled into a barn. All the posts are just original wood, and all of the rafters are obviously cut apart and reassembled, and there is no central ridge beam, which does leave a little bit of instability up top. But I've crawled up there. It's nice and tight. The structure doesn't feel unstable in any way. And while everything seems to be bowed and leaning in odd directions, it's all holding together without moving. We did have some issues with the roofing metal, wanting to separate at the edges. So right at the leading edge and trailing edge of the building. So I've been up there a couple of times to screw panels back down, but once the screws are in place, the panels haven't moved again. So everything feels relatively stable. We do have this one odd little bump in the roofing. Not really sure what happened to this particular rafter. Why that rafter has lifted up on the end to kind of distort the roof line. But it's holding. It's structurally sound. Moving further into the barn, we do have other animal pens. This pen actually has a large gate associated with it, so it's already gated. Not sure the gate is ideal for this size pen. It looks a little bit too large, like it was retrofitted here. But there is an area here where animals could be kept. It looks like somebody used it as a workstation at some point. Built some workbenches in here. We may make use of those later on. Right now they're inaccessible. This gate hasn't been opened because we piled up a bunch of tools and materials when we moved in. And all of this stuff that we just sort of piled in the back of the barn as we were moving in, we had no other place for it. And it got tossed back in here. We've come in and grabbed bits and pieces of it as we've needed tools. But for the most part, this pile has just become a larger and more disorganized mess. Now, the reason everything is as dirty and dusty as it is we are on a dirt floor. This is a true barn. And the chickens are just right here. So the chicken coop is only separated from the barn by this mesh chicken wire. And the chickens do produce quite a bit of dust. And that's the dust we see coating everything in the barn here. So even the area where we're trying to keep hay nice and dry, it gets caked pretty heavily with the dust. Another nice large pen area. This was more than likely an area where machinery was stored. It's not separated as a pen, and everything looks to have been well opened so the machinery could be put in here easily. I haven't wanted to put machinery in here because it's also the one spot in the floor where there appears to be moisture even when it's not raining. So this is Kentucky, and we do get seepage coming out of the ground in odd places. And this corner looks to be one of those places where water just kind of bubbles up through the soil. So it turns out this is not an ideal spot for either animals or machinery. And everything does stay relatively damp up here in this front section of the barn. So we'll be looking to dry this portion of the barn out, hopefully figure out where that water is coming from, see if it can be cut off in any way, maybe redirected before it gets into the barn. But for right now, don't really want to store many large machines in here. I may use like the first 8 feet of this giant pen over here as a place to put the four-wheelers and or trailers. But all the other machinery is going to need to go on the other side. So that's today's objective, is to get some of these side pens cleared out and make it possible for us to get this pile of tools and debris moved away from the back door. Because once we are able to get the back door open, then we'll have that true pass-through barn. We'll be able to pass from the front of the barn out the back, and out behind the barn is where the cabin is. Access the cabin, we've got to go out of the barn through the front door and then walk all the way around the chickens in order to get back there. So it will be nice to be able to make a straight pass right through the barn. Again, have no idea what the hinge setup is on these doors just yet, but it does look like they are ready to be opened. Just gotta clear the pathway. So it just seems to me the best place to start is right here at the front of the barn, right inside the front door. I'm going to begin by just dragging everything out of this bay. I need to make a good assessment of exactly what the state of this bay is, and I can't do that when it's full of debris. Some of this may be useful material. The vast majority of it, I have a feeling, is nothing but trash, and we're going to try to get that out of the barn and not put it back in here. I do see a big stack of tires back there. Every place in Kentucky, everywhere you go and you see a farm, you're going to see big stacks of tires. Not sure really how that happened, but we're just going to drag those out of here. We won't be putting them back into the barn. We're going to have to find some other place for those tires to go. But this is not unlike any other project that I've undertaken like this in the past. The only thing you really can do is to take everything out and then put back in only those items that you want in the space. So I'm going to roll up my sleeves, get a mask on to protect myself from the dust, and just get busy pulling stuff out. So far we got a bunch of material that needs to go back into the barn and a bunch of material that probably won't. The tires need to go somewhere else. We're going to burn up most of this old wood. It's not really very useful. It's dry rotted or it's too small. Not sure what we're going to do with all of these old election signs. We may actually have some good use, and then we're just going to have to make a run to the dump with all of these loose pieces of debris. But we're fighting, once again, a storm. It seems like we're doing this quite often on videos. This is rolling in now from the north, and we're going to have to change what we're doing a little bit. We can't keep dragging everything outside, but we do have a solid and tight barn. Well, mostly solid and tight. It'll have a few drips on the inside, but we can continue to work without getting soaking wet. So we're just going to keep going here in the barn. So we got the first bay mostly cleaned out. There's still this big chunk of wood that's shoved up against the front wall. It does appear to be putting some tension or pressure on the wall. It will not budge. So the weight of the wall is pressing down on that big chunk of wood. I'm not really sure why that's there just yet. It could be somebody's way of blocking up that front wall to keep it from falling back. So I'm going to evaluate that very carefully before we go trying to pull that out of there. There's also a little bit of fertilizer back here in the corner. It's in a very weak plastic bag, so I'm going to take my time getting that out of here. We want to make sure we deal with that correctly. It's going to be a ton of nitrogen all in one place. Big pile of concrete back in the corner. Obviously, those concrete bags are going to be saturated with water, and they are not going to be useful. So that's probably just great big chunks of rock at this point. We do have some electrical coming into the barn. I'm not really sure exactly what we have going on here, but it appears we do have some power coming in from underground. That's going to be from the house. And we do have a breaker panel here. I don't have a lot of confidence in it because a lot of this is still wide open. So if you look at this outlet on the wall over here, the box is not closed. And so any open wires in there that have spider webs running between them can cause arcing and problems there. This electrical box that's hanging up here, I'm not sure exactly what it was originally intended for, but I don't see any lights on the outside of the building, which I'm guessing that was originally a light switch for outside. I still haven't deciphered where this yellow cable goes. That you see actually running across the top of the front door. And then there's this electrical outlet over here where there is obvious signs of burning and arcing that took place. So have zero confidence in this electrical setup. But there is electrical out here, so we can make use of that. We're just going to have to rewire everything, put it into some sort of conduit and make sure it's all set up correctly. I was looking at this table and trying to decide what took place here. Obviously, something has shifted. Either these posts have pushed back up out of the ground a good 6 inches, or that fence that they're attached to dropped down a good 6 inches. This, I'm sure, was level when it was originally put in. So there's been some sort of change in the ground underneath this table. That's something that still needs to be evaluated. We also have a good bit of moisture in the ground here. It's not dry. And like we were talking about earlier, here in Kentucky, water does just pop up out of the ground in odd places, especially up here on this ridge line. This could just be one of those wet spots, but this also could be infiltration coming from outside. So water running down the hill is actually penetrating into the barn. So there are some ideas that I have for how to manage that. If it's coming in from outside, I think we could probably just dig a trench down the front side of the barn and make sure we get the water away from the barn, move it over to the other side and allow it to go downhill in a different direction. So we'll be looking at how to dry this up. I don't want to put machinery in on top of this moisture. Anything we put in here, if it's metal, it's going to rust. So I want to make sure we stay off of the top of this with machinery. But there's all kinds of gear and plastics and tools and stuff that we could store in here. So now we have a usable bay that's ready to go. Again, with this dampness, I wouldn't want to put animals in here either. That's sort of key, is to make sure that they're high and dry. And they wouldn't be dry in here right now until we get this moisture sorted out. But we have our first bay cleaned out. As you can see, this is going to take a few days. We're not going to be able to get everything done in one day to get all the way back to the chickens and to get our barn opened up from one end to the other. That is ultimately the goal. We want to be able to drive through the barn. And the first project that I have in mind once we get that done is to get the chickens all set up for winter. We do need to get them some new bedding in there. I also want to replace their roosting bars with something more appropriate. And we've got a new nest box set up that we want to put up in there. So that's all coming on an upcoming video, so stay tuned for that. And we're going to do a lot more cleanup out here in the barn. So we do appreciate you joining us on the Return Homestead today. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, if you do us a favor, go ahead and subscribe and hit that thumbs up icon while you're in there. That's going to let the algorithm know you enjoyed the video, so they'll share it out with more people. We'll see you next time.